Hi guys, we're gonna let everybody kind of trickle in, I think, before we get started. But feel free to start introducing yourselves in the chat if you want to.
All right. Looks like we've got uh, the participant numbers kind of stayed steady for a minute here. So I think might be good to go ahead and get started. Like seeing everybody introducing themselves in the chat. Thank you very much. My name is Mike. With me today is Audrey Nielsen and Marjorie Childers. Audrey and I are researchers, investigative journalists on the MuckRock Sunlight Research Desk, and Marjorie is with New Mexico In Depth. And all together today, we're going to be talking about using campaign finance and, to a lesser extent, but still an important part of what we're talking about, personal financial disclosures in your not just election coverage, but also just political coverage overall. If you have questions, we will have a block at the end to field them. But throughout, Elizabeth was monitoring the chat throughout the presentation. We'll be able to sort of interrupt and get your questions addressed to us as time permits. Let's go ahead and get started. Can everyone see my screen that I'm sharing just fine? Tested this before, but get a nod. Yeah, okay. So today we're talking about two main kinds of data available at the the federal, state, and more local levels. So I'll be covering the federal version of this. Audrey and Marjorie will be covering more of the state and local versions, but we're talking about campaign finance data and ethics disclosures today. The former campaign finance, these are funds raised and spent by campaign committees in elections. So these are the campaign committees for individual candidates that they'll set up just to be a corporate entity managing the funds and spending for their campaign, as well as other kinds of committees like political action committees or super PACs. These kinds of funds, they come and go in different ways. So different receipts to committees, different expenditures by committees, spending on behalf of other candidates from completely removed committees. There's a whole bunch of different ways money can move around. We're going to talk about different forms that can take and what that looks like in different types of data from the Federal Election Commission, the FEC. The other kind of data, ethics disclosures, these come from a few other like government oversight or ethics boards in the different sort of stages of the legislature or houses of the legislature, sorry, and sort of your judicial and executive branches. And these are filings that candidates or appointed officials have to make with those ethics regulatory bodies that say, just sort of give an indication of what their financial or overall legal situation is moving into office. So if they have large investments in companies or obligations to different firms that are set to continue throughout their appointment to that position or election to that office, they have to disclose that to varying extents, pardon me, between the federal and state levels. So we're going to start off at the federal level with talking about FEC data and also touching on some of the personal financial disclosure data as well. So the Federal Election Commission, if you're trying to integrate some of this stuff into your reporting, they are your friend. This is the body at the federal government that just regulates a lot of nitty-gritty about elections. In particular, with the data we're talking about today, it is the registration and sort of constant filing requirements of different campaign committees. So if you go to their website, fec.gov/data, do we get the pointer? Anyways, fec.gov/data, you can get a very nice dashboard there that has pretty clear search boxes for looking for particular candidates you may be interested in or different PACs, and then seeing also looking at contributions or expenditures to particular companies to or from particular individuals or companies, right? So you seeing where the money is going to in concentrated ways or where it's coming from in more coordinated ways. When you are actually looking at a given committee or candidate, it'll give you nice sort of summaries about how much a candidate has raised or spent. So, for example, Abdul Al Sayed running for uh, the Democratic sort of what are we talking about? Primary seat uh, for senator in Michigan. We can see for that candidate a couple of bits of information. We can see what the for any selection of years here, looking at 2021 to 2026, he had run for. I know he had a gubernatorial run previously, but all the relevant sort of federal level stuff here is going to be for the 2025-2026 campaign. And we can see what his campaign committee was, or is, sorry, Abdul for US Senate. And then it gives you sort of an ID number that can be useful when searching later on, because sometimes the committee name will change. But if the corporate entity stays one thing, it will keep the same ID. But we can see a bunch of information here. So candidate information on the left, as well as sort of funds raised and spent, and then other filings. That last filing bit will have plenty of other relevant information to that particular candidate or the other individuals running their campaign committee. So who the treasurer is, who the sort of head of the committee is. A lot of people involved in seeing how they might be tied to other campaigns in that way could be source of potential and useful information for a story. I cut it off at the top here just to kind of show you what the navigation looks like. But if we zoom in a bit on the fundraising records, so different kinds of receipts they get for campaign contributions, either from other committees or from individuals. There is a nice sort of overview here, like sort of a pivot table you could make from the individual raw data, which I'll give you a screenshot of, and that is very available from the FEC. That's kind of the big what you want to grab here. But you can see here what the total incoming money is, right? So total receipts. That's split up in a couple of different categories. You've got individual contributions, you've got transfers from other committees, and then sort of different lines of credit, right? So loans received. So other offsets and accounting amounts are sort of listed as well. But the big ones you're probably going to want to look at are transfers from other committees and total contributions. So contributions are mostly split up between contributions from individuals, and those are itemized and unitemized. You're only going to get receipts from itemized individual contributions within contributions from individuals, where a lot of smaller contributions are going to get sort of put together and they don't have to file those. So over a certain dollar limit, they have to file them. So big, multi-thousand-dollar contributions, or if you see sort of a very well capitalized individual trying to enter in and support a candidate, those are probably the ones that are going to pop out here. Transfers from other committees, that's going to be your sort of joint fundraising committees or things like Win Red or Act Blue that help to, well, those are listed in the individual contributions. But the different forms that money takes, in a sense, coming into these campaign coffers, you're going to see that sort of split up here. Oh, sorry. Schedule A is what they call them. Schedule A filings are the receipt filings. Your spending records or your disbursements, that's the kind of odd noun they use for that. Those are going to be your Schedule B forms, and these are just filings that these campaign committees have to make. Tracking sort of what they spend their money on and where it's going to. These include just sort of operating expenditures, transfers to other committees. So any transfer from a committee should be mirrored by a Schedule B transfer filing from the sort of joint fundraising committee or other sort of political committee that the money is moving to. So there should be some parity there uh, if you're checking records between committees. And a lot of other forms of just sort of like payments for office expenditures or various campaign events, um, payments to some payments to individuals that aren't necessarily staff, or some staff payments will be filed under your disbursements.
What?
And this can show you connections to sort of local businesses that they're working with or other individuals who may have been working for the campaign in a less explicit way. Um, there are uh, there are far more detailed data than that available on the FEC website. Um, what I was looking at or showing you right there were sort of screenshots of the dashboards you get when just looking at a campaign or a given candidate or elected official. Uh, those are all gathered from the just mountains and mountains of filings that the FEC has for the different receipts and disbursements or independent expenditures, which I'll discuss in a moment, um, from these different committees. And you can get to that essentially by clicking on the Browse Disbursements button at the top right corner there, or Browse Receipts. And that'll bring you to this large kind of spreadsheet database view that they have for different kinds of receipts or disbursement filings. Keeping an eye on the timer here. And from these, you're going to see a lot of just information about the people submitting that money, where they're from, when they spent it, and how much they contributed, right? Kind of the same details for disbursements as well. Here you're going to see a couple of examples, again, looking at this one candidate, where the it looks like the payroll company Gusto paid a very small amount, probably for some sort of accounting purpose here. But Abdul himself seems to have paid in like 3,500. Then you're going to see a lot of these sort of examples. And I mentioned WinRed and Act Blue before. And these are Act Blue is a sort of committee that takes a bunch of smaller donations from people and just in a sort of politically focused way disperses them to different candidates, different Democratic candidates running throughout the country. So if, essentially, it's for people that don't know exactly what candidate they want to contribute to, but know they have like a general political inclination. They just give Act Blue money, and Act Blue sends it to candidates that they pick, essentially. And each one of those filings is doubled. So it's the same $10. So it's not $20. This is important for when you're actually adding up these numbers in your reporting. It's very easy to double count things between the Act Blue and WinRed is the Republican equivalent of that. So the Yasser Al-Bayzian donation of $50, they didn't match that. They just took that and routed it to the El-Sayed campaign. This is indicated in the actual spreadsheet data. We're getting a little technical at this point, but it's one of the big things you want to look out for when looking at the actual raw data. You get a lot more information on that particular filing by clicking on the plus button on the right. That's what I was trying to draw with the emoticon type thing there. And from that, you can get an actual view of the PDF of the filing itself. It is an actual bit of paperwork they have to file. So you can get a bit more information looking at that. Outside of candidates, I'm running a little long here, but outside of candidates, you also get information about individual committees. So each campaign will have its campaign committee, but as I mentioned before, there's many different types of political committees that have to register what they're doing with the FEC. So these are your political action committees or PACs and super PACs, which have fewer limits on the amount of money they can raise and spend. But from that, you can get a lot of information about the individuals involved, like your committee directors or treasurers. Same sort of information about receipts and disbursements that you get with the campaign committees. Your sort of transfers to other committees are going to be a bit more salient here because often the point of a separate committee is to raise funds on behalf of a campaign committee. The one here, leading the future, is sort of a tech AI forward hack trying to promote, sort of that industry's interests. Got substantial multi-million dollar donations from Greg Brockman, OpenAI guy, as well as Ben Horowitz and Mark Andreessen from A16Z. If you going into those individual receipts, they've got a lot of money to spend. But a big thing with super PACs is independent expenditures. So these are your Schedule E forms. That is a separate sort of view under the database. If you go into spending, it's one of the options. These are going to be your political advertisements largely. So big political money spent by PACs and super PACs is going to be in those independent expenditure filings. So that it's an important thing to include when looking at analyses of sort of the financial landscape of a given election. The advertising spend is listed with a certain like the target, the election that it concerns, a specific candidate that advertisement is talking about, and whether or not they suppose or whether or not they oppose or support it. So these things can give you a sense of how much money is being spent in which direction, essentially, uh, from committees outside of the actual campaign committees. So a lot of information on the website for campaign finance information, a lot to learn there. I went over a lot of it, but the big ones are your receipts are Schedule A, disbursements are Schedule B, independent expenditures are Schedule E, and then tying that all together with a more directed uh, sort of financial picture of the candidate themselves or the appointed official we're talking about. A good way to do that is to look at their personal financial disclosures. So personal financial disclosures, as I mentioned before, these are documents that candidates are required to file with any number of different sort of government ethics oversight boards. Here I have a bunch of links. Screenshot this. It's being recorded as well. So I don't have time to get into all these individual examples. We're focusing more on campaign finance today. But looking at sort of, they're required to disclose their assets, income, liabilities, various different obligations and agreements they have to other companies, organizations, serving as, say, like a director or an officer on the board of a nonprofit or something. That would have to be listed there. The House and the Senate each have their separate individual personal financial disclosure reporting websites. The two links are listed there. For the executive branch, there are a lot of, I mean, not only the president, VP, et cetera, but all the sort of appointed cabinet members underneath them. They all have to file these. Some of them are not immediately available through the oge.gov website that I'm listing there, but you can request copies of them. I'm not sure why they don't just have a download link, but if you give it a day or two, they do get back to you. The judicial branch also has a separate website for these personal financial disclosures, the pub.jeffs.uscourts.gov. To use that website, though, you do have to register an account. So if you want to get some of this data without necessarily putting your name into the website for whatever sort of variable risk levels you have for privacy, there are other websites that have mirrored those disclosures. So I know up through 2024, anyways, fixthecourt.com has their own sort of searchable data set for this. Other websites, other publications, even ProPublica has gone specifically into financial disclosures from members of the Trump administration to look into their sort of business ties and obligations as well. There are a lot of sort of more niche presentations of this data because it can be quite a lot, but that's a good place to start with all the federal stuff. So looking at state level information now, I think I'm going to pass it to Marjorie, who's going to show what she's been working on with New Mexico campaign finance data.
Marjorie, you are muted.
Thank you, Michael. That was a lot of information, and I'm one of the folks who otherwise would be taking this webinar just to learn about the FEC. So thanks for that download on that data. And it is from for someone who's kind of mired at the state level, it is a whole other kind of realm that I find challenging. So I'm always learning new things every time someone gives a presentation on it. Um, so I'm Marjorie Childress with New Mexico in Depth. We're a nonprofit newsroom and a Sunlight member. We're thrilled to have Sunlight kind of in the mix these days. Um, so New Mexico in Depth has reported on elections with a focus on money and politics for more than a decade. And that's because it opens a window into networks of influence around elections. It allows you to see how incumbents are building and maintaining political relationships over time, who continues to support them year after year, and how relationships evolve over time. It just really sheds a lot of light on kind of politics and then the nexus with public policy, really, and how that gets developed over the years. And of course, it frequently produces a lot of accountability stories, whether about undisclosed relationships, conflicts of interest, unusual spending patterns, etc. So, I'm going to kind of dive in because I think one of the reasons these guys wanted me on here was just kind of give you an example. So why don't I share my screen? Um, okay. I thought I would talk a little bit about just how to do this kind of reporting because we're all different. Our state landscapes are all different. We all have different laws. If I start there, for instance, this is our campaign. This is the splash page on our Secretary of State's website where I can download our Campaign Reporting Act. Um, I think the first step in if you want to wrap your arms around how to do reporting on campaign finance is to read the statute and become very conversant in it. And not it's the campaign finance statute, but you probably also have a lobbyist regulation act of some sort. You probably have a law around financial disclosures, which those are the ethics disclosures that Michael talked about quite a bit. And to understand what your state requires and doesn't require is really important. Um, I've been doing this for, gosh, a really long time, well over a decade or more at this point, and I still am realizing new things about what's in our statute. So I think that is your first step because you don't want to miss something or go down rabbit holes because and then realize later that the statute actually doesn't require something. So once you've understood that, what's in your statute, then you want to look at what information you can get. So in New Mexico, this is our Secretary of State's campaign finance reporting information system that is available to the public. It looks really pretty, just like the FEC. But our laws in New Mexico definitely don't require as much information as the FEC requires of federal candidates. And so I have looked around other states over the years for reporting projects when I wanted to, see different things that super PACs or lobbyists at work in New Mexico were doing in other states. I've gone and kind of looked around, and I feel like we all have very different websites. So I think the next step beyond really thinking about the statute, what's in your statute, is to actually go find out what you can get without having to go through like the public records process. Hopefully, what you're able to get is some structured data that you can download. So, like in New Mexico, we have data downloads. And then we can also, we also have financial disclosure statements at our fingertips. We have lobbyist expenditures at our fingertips. Um, and then we have just the individual lawmakers or public officials or candidates pages on here where you can look at all of their reports in PDF form. Um, for us, this site is a big improvement over what we had a few years ago, but it still has a lot of gaps in it. So New Mexico in Depth we've actually created our own site. I know this seems really extreme in some ways, but This is Money Trail, New Mexico, and it's just a tool that I want to show you. We've created this by working with a company in Chicago called DataMade, a technology firm. And what they do is they take information from the Secretary of State's website and they automatically create this. It updates every night at midnight. And so it has all the most up-to-date information that they can extract from the Secretary of State's website. And we actually get more that way than if we just use the Secretary of State's website. Now, this kind of thing is a big undertaking. It requires obviously some resources spent in developing a website, but you can also do simple things if you have some kind of, someone on staff or someone that you're in relationship with, and you want to find out if you can somehow access PDF information. So on this site, we actually we just have a downloadable function, for instance, for our financial disclosure spreadsheets, because all of these are in PDF form, and we wanted something that actually pulled them all together so we could search them more effectively. And what this did was give us and the public, because we've made this publicly available, a structured data set. And when you have a structured data set, you're able to do reporting. It just opens up your reporting possibilities. You can look at trends. You can over election cycles. You can look at you know, the same, how many donors or what particular donors give to what particular candidates. You can really look at um, relationships among political actors much more effectively. It's just the structured data that you can get and this is what I mean by structured data. This is a big fat spreadsheet that you can get from downloads or data in this format is golden. And before I kind of launch into some examples of our reporting, which I'll show you kind of some of the stuff that you can do, I'll just say that you can actually through the process of everything I just described, knowing what's in your statute and actually, what data you can access, you can open up a whole reporting beat around transparency. And I think that is kind of a really important part of reporting on money in politics is what is available to the public to see and to understand about their candidates. What information does the statute require? What loopholes are in it? And then once you have what's in the statute, how easily can you access the information? And we found this to be a really fruitful, long-standing reporting beat that's adjacent to our money and politics work. Um, because what we're really talking about is the ability for the public to understand who's trying to influence their elections. So some examples of our recent work. Oops, sorry. So here's our website. And so during the primary, just to give you some examples of what we've been able to do by accessing that data. Um, so one of our big projects during the primary was reporting on a dark money group. A lot of people are interested in dark money. It's very important. I mean, dark money just means you can't find out who's actually funding the political activity. And then there's this concept called gray money, where a nonprofit is reported as the donor to a PAC, but that nonprofit doesn't have to disclose its donors. And we saw a lot of that in our primary this year. And we did quite a bit of reporting on this new chapter in New Mexico, which was one of the largest groups to come along during the primary. I mean, to be honest with you, I see these kinds of groups pop up every election cycle and they kind of come and go. Next election cycle, there will be another one really, really interesting name. But ultimately they're kind of skirting around, trying to find ways to not report their donors. And so we've now seen the State Ethics Commission is taking up an action to try to compel this group to report their donors. We also worked with a student intern, this year to do some campaign questionnaires. And because we always wrap in a money kind of in politics angle, I always tell people, reporters, don't just report the story. Before you do that, go look at their money. And we do training in-house on how to go find it. And this is where you actually don't need necessarily the structured data. You can just go straight to this candidate's PDF forms. And she identified that this candidate had busted through his limits on in-kind donations. It's actually this one right here. Um, and she did a series of really short stories about this candidate who had exceeded his campaign contribution limits, and now he has paid some of those back. And then to me, that's an example of some of the really smaller accountability stories that you can identify to hold people accountable. And he was very amenable to. I mean, it's almost like he was like, "Oh, you know," and he since has tried to rectify the situation. And then this one, the Holland Bregman and the Math of the Grassroots. This is the kind an example of what you can do to really analyze donors to tell a story around like two candidates, like where is their money coming from geographically? What's the dispersal? Is it coming from within your state, from without your state? Who's supporting the candidates? What's the size of the donations? Do they have small donors mainly? Do they have big donors? If they're big donors, what big donors are they? And what does that tell you about the candidates? And you can do some really good reporting with great data analysis and graphics and really inform your audience quite a bit about a candidate, kind of the just by who's supporting them. So um, I think I'll leave it at that and pass it over to Audrey. And I look forward to answering any questions later that people have.
Hi guys. Thank you so much, Marjorie. And I am going to take over the share screen. All right, is that working for everybody? We have so when you I think we're going to share these slides later on. When we share these slides later on, all of these are linked to some of what Marjorie shared, and then some of the projects and the beat that Marjorie was highlighting in the slide deck from this presentation. And then we're going to go into continuing to talk a little bit more about what's available state to state with that money and politics beat in mind. So everything that we just learned about how to approach it in New Mexico, let's take some of the lessons that Marjorie walked us through and apply it to how do we approach this in any state in the country. So starting off in your guys' states, there's actually a really excellent resource from the FEC, which is the combined federal state disclosure and election directory, and they keep it relatively well updated. I made a tiny CC link for y'all. And if you follow that link, it will bring you to the little directory that they've collected, which, if you pick your state, will bring you to an individual page on this PDF. I think part of what's really useful about this is it both immediately tells you everything that you need to know about the authority for your election data, because it's not always the Secretary of State, depending on the state that you're in. And sometimes campaign finance and ethics data are split across multiple authorities or multiple agencies, and this resource breaks down every single authority that touches on these types of data sets state by state. Um, Here's an example. So if you see in Alaska, you'd be able to jump right into the Public Offices Commission, which has state and municipal campaign finance reports together. In Arizona, you have a breakdown not only of their website for the Secretary of State, everything that the Secretary of State maintains in relation to election data, but also a like pre-prepped for you source list of the people that you should talk to if you are trying to understand this system better, with all of their contact information. Same here in Connecticut for the Elections Enforcement Commission, which has a specific narrowed focus. So this is maybe one of the most useful reference data sets that anyone's put together for doing an election beat where you're trying to find information on one state, or you're maybe reporting as a freelancer or a regional reporter on multiple states. Okay. In general, we're going to try and jump from who is in charge to what are they in charge of. So like Marjorie mentioned, you want to understand what the actual statute says about what your state requires be reported. And in this case, there are ways that you can get summaries. I think you're best served in general to actually read the full text of the statute if you're able to, particularly the reporting requirements. But the National Conference of State Legislatures has put together a really great toolkit on information about state requirements. They've broken down the comparative what each state requires on uh, the total amount you have to report, the amount over which you have to be reporting itemized contributions. These common but not across the board consistent requirements for state finance reporting in general. They also have collected a database of legislation. So they are like the preeminent source of, is there new legislation changing campaign finance regulations in any state? So it's worth subscribing to that page or keeping an eye on it if this is your beat. Okay. So some states might actually have more granular, helpful data than you could find for some federal races. It depends on the design philosophy of their databases. It depends on what they're requiring people file. But I'm highlighting here Washington State has a really excellent state-made portal where you can see, in addition to the campaign finance information, they have all of the candidacy information, the race that they ran in, how the race ended up happening. In this case, we can see that Alan Makiev lost in his primary, all in the same spot where we're looking at his initial financial overview. And they directly link you out to every related form for both his candidacy and his campaign finance data. It's worth, like Marjorie said, when you're taking a first step into a new state or your own state, understanding everything that database offers you if there is a public database, and then interrogating what isn't there too. Um, State campaign finance databases also may have flash data that's updated more often. Some states update like to the day with additional transactions depending on how they make campaigns and committees report, while others may have more frequent report deadlines. So a third document to keep collecting would be, like Mike shared for the federal deadlines in the chat earlier, you should have a schedule for your annual deadlines for campaign finance and other regulatory requirements for the election or money and finance beat, money and elections beat. Also, ballot measures, matching funds, not a thing on the federal level, but these state databases, and if you go further into the local level, will have additional information on moneyed support for ballot measures that directly impact people's lives, and also campaign public funds in municipalities and states that have them, which can really change the shape of an election year. And I think Florida is one of the states that has like a regime for state level public funds. Okay, so moving to state level ethics disclosures. I am a huge public disclosure, ethics disclosure nerd. If you are ever interested in talking about more of them, I've probably talked more about them than almost any other person in the country. They are really useful. Marjorie talked a little bit about how useful they can be, especially broken down into individual data points in New Mexico. And we looked a little bit at them federally, but they are a new and different joy in every single state. So same as campaign finance, you want to look at the statutes, but the first thing you want to do when you're dealing with ethics disclosures in general is to either have a blank or already filled out form and really get familiar with every section. Because those sections will tell you a lot about what is expected by the requirement and what might be missing from the state of the requirement. And then the databases that collect these for the states that collect them, shout out to our handful of states that require you to do fully requests only, and our single state in the country that requires no disclosures at all from any electeds or candidates. These databases take a few different forms. Some of them are literally just a list someone updates once a year, and some of them are fully interactive. The forms themselves can have really interesting insights. In this, you can see in a North Carolina disclosure, I think, at the top there. Oh, wait, no, that's a New York disclosure. You can see you can give a whole breakdown of your spouse's affiliations. Those positions of authority are considered in a number of states as something that could influence someone's decision making. So it's important to be able to collect them when you're doing this kind of backgrounding reporting on a race or on a sitting office holder. In Nevada, these redactions are mine. In this case, it's a good flag that a lot of these filings will have full private personal information. Normally, a lot of these people are going to be public figures, not exclusively, and sometimes you want to be careful with how you're disseminating the information, the same way that the state is careful. But oh, they got angry with me. Hold, please. Sorry, guys. Is that fun? But you can see in New York, you even get a narrative description of a potential conflict. This is our governor's financial disclosure in New York, explaining her spouse's relationship to his law firm and an assurance that he does not participate with cases involving clients with state agencies. That narrative data could feed right into a story about the Hokels. And you will also get a number of titles, the government agencies where they pay, the amount of compensation they receive from certain jobs that they are either elected, appointed to, or that they list externally, and breakdowns of other relationships, both volunteer or paid. In Nevada here, especially, you have both for the person filing the form and any adult member of their household. So not only their spouse, but any adult children who live with them. Moving on. And I want to flag that state level ethics disclosures in general drill down far farther than on the federal level. So these can go down to the level of your local community college board or whatever the boxing commission in North Carolina is. Some of these state regimes have thousands of agencies that they're reporting on. They may also have far shallower requirements compared to other states, or their reporting deadlines or accuracy of the forms filed might be under-enforced. And that's worth thinking about in the context of this kind of reporting, because the accountability side of these filings, even more so than campaign finance filings individually, is kind of on the press. So these high impact stories about whether people are being fully honest in their filings, whether they're completing their filings the way that they're supposed to, are kind of a responsibility of local news reporting. And felony history narrative disclosures might be special to your state, and they might be underutilized for reporting. I wanted to highlight a bunch of stories. These are also linked in the slides, but there is a really great beat on the accountability angle for who is actually filing and filing well. So I want to highlight some reporting from across the country on failing to file, filing badly, or about the requirements themselves. So there's a handful of stories here from North Dakota, from New York, a Nevada Independent story from our Sunlight members who we collaborated with them on, the Pennsylvania Tribune, and a story I worked on with a partner in North Carolina. And out in Massachusetts, a story that's literally about the requirements for reporting overall, which in a lot of states is adapted to the internet age, but the requirements were established half a century ago. So it's worth keeping in mind. And to run through, there's only a few things to think about drilling down further to local that I want you to keep in mind. Local campaign finance and ethics disclosures can be a lot harder to get to because they might be fully maintained at the municipal level. Your state may have a directory and it's worth trying to find them. In here, I'm highlighting, I think, Minnesota and a Texas directory that breaks down all the municipal and county level campaign finance and election data resources. Your state might not have anything like that. So you might have to then do some discovery to pull the regions that are within your reporting beat. You should read how your state law governs those local jurisdictions because they might have fewer requirements or more requirements than the state level cross-state campaign finance deadlines. And you should pay close attention to the way in which they're sharing the data because there might be a way that makes it easier for you to access, or it might be a lot tougher. And you want to know that when you're not in the heat of a breaking story or the first time you're looking at it. And this is a really great opportunity when you're getting down to local resources like this to call the clerk or custodian who actually maintains these pages because they are dealing with a lot fewer reporters than your state level and federal authorities here. And I want to, as we're wrapping up, just flag an opportunity in general to connect these jurisdictions that we've been talking about throughout this whole presentation, which is very often people who run for federal office have already served in some form in a state office or in a municipal office or vice versa. So there's been really great reporting on an issue with Brinker Harding's filings on the federal level. There's a criminal investigation into his failure to file, but Brinker Harding also was a city council representative in Omaha, so there are a ton of his previous personal financial disclosures locally, which are a source of interesting information. Similarly, it can go in the opposite direction, where Kelly Ayotte and Mike Braun moved from federal office to state level office. So their federal disclosures end up really good context, and their federal campaign finance records would become really great context for what are they doing on the state level in these state races. And then additionally, I wanted to highlight for all three of us a handful of additional resources. We already talked about the National Conference of State Legislators. There's also Transparency USA, which collects a good amount of interesting information state by state for campaign finance data. Cal Matters has a similar project to the Money and Politics project in New Mexico. It goes beyond campaign finance data, but they have a collection of campaign finance and election related data as well. The OpenFCC API might expose data in a way that you don't experience it on the website and contains everything we need mostly for reporting on it. And Open Secrets in general has really solid federal data. Their state level data is a few election cycles out of date and may no longer be a priority for them, but is still worth checking for your reporting. And moneyandpolitics.wtf is a very silly named resource, but is possibly one of the best aggregated resources for all of these crazy terms we've been talking about in this session, and some that we haven't even like jumped into, where anything that you might have to understand in most of these filings will be broken down in that tool, and you can suggest additional ones. And I think that that's everything that we prepared, so we can move into our question period. If anybody has any questions, you can drop them into the chat, or you can feel free to unmute and ask directly. And is there any thoughts that occurred to you, Michael or Marjorie, as we were going through that you want to append at the end as
Yes.
well?
Um, Throughout me babbling at the top there, I mentioned or failed to mention, sorry, two very important things with the fec.gov/data site, which is that all of the sort of tables that I was showing of individual contributions and disbursements, they are all they are all available for download as the CSV tables. So you can take them, download them, play around with them in Python and Pandas, or just put them into a spreadsheet and do sort of your pivot tables and such. So a lot more flexible than just the website itself. And then with all of these different state and federal level disclosures and sort of campaign finance filings, the at the federal and state and local levels, they'll all be on different schedules. I know both of the Audrey and Marjorie mentioned this at the state level, but for the federal level, they're pretty set. Different kinds of committees have different schedules. So it's either monthly or quarterly, different 24 and 48-hour reports during the campaign. But a lot of that information is also helpfully on the FEC website, and I included a link to that in the chat. Yeah. As Audrey said, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat, or if you would like to ask, then just raise your hand and we can unmute you. I was showing some different screenshots of the FEC website. If you do have questions, please, please do jump in. If we happen to just convey all of this information perfectly and you have no other questions, then Amy, are you able to unmute or? I'm not certain.
While we're waiting for Amy, I will say I just looked at the silly website, the moneyandpolitics.wtf, and I think that is super useful. Mhm. Because one of the challenges is lingo. Um, so I really think, Audrey, that's a great resource, and thank you for that.
Yeah, it's a barrier for entry. I think the team that put that together was really keen. There's not too much crazy in there, but it's the key elements that normally trip people up, I think.
Mhm. Amy's back now in the waiting room.
Hi. Are you guys moved on now?
We're
Uh,
still on questions, so it's if you have one, then
So
please.
I'm sorry, I was driving and then I had all that technical trouble of I wondered if I had heard correctly that to begin with, it's good to get the state's campaign finance regulation and rule. Did
Yes.
I did hear that correctly? Is that just a case of Googling it or
So you can definitely start from Google, but one of the most helpful resources I think in this space is the national I'm going to drop the link. It's this toolkit that breaks down each state's legislative requirements, and that gives you a starting point to know which act you're looking at and its basic requirements in each one.
Okay, good, because that is, if you could do that link, um, I could find it. Um, one of the things that I guess I'm here because of is because, and I don't know if this is the right time to talk about it, or if you've got more information and I should just move along or whatever, but tell me. Um, I am increasingly feeling that calls to congressmen, working with people on special interests, there's an unresponsive out to lunch Congress. And so the reason I'm here at this meeting is to figure out, okay, let's try and starve them from their money, because they're not working for people in the country, they're working for the special interests that provide them their money for their campaigns. And it's like a game of whack-a-mole all the time to figure out, thank you for that link, you know, what are they doing now? I mean, they're constantly up to some rule making BS, and I'm just feeling like, I know there's a whole thing of trying to make people feel like we are absolutely um, powerless, and I resisted. No, we have to be able to do something. So, anywho, I really appreciate this link here. And anybody want to jump in and say anything about that, or just thank you, ma'am, move along, please?
I will say at the very least, I think part of what can happen through really good money in politics reporting at any of these jurisdiction levels is it allows the press, and then it allows everyone through good reporting to hold public officials accountable to their own biases, to their own conflicts of interest, and put that really like apparent through their campaign finance spending, through where they're getting their money and how they're spending it. And at the very least, we see every year really excellent reporting that puts in context, this person voted this way on housing. Did you know that they're a landlord? This person voted this way on tech regulation. Did you know that they own a bunch of stock in Anthropic? Oh, I am previewing their IPO drop because I'm sure that's where we're going to go. Um, but I think that that's a natural end to on a bipartisan level to this type of reporting, is making sure that public officials have to be transparent about those conflicts.
Okay, that's great. And it gives me some light at the end of the tunnel. The other thing is, are these journalists, are you guys professional journalists? Because I'm not. And I'm trying to think, my paper in my town, is there a whole aspect to this that helps people understand how to do citizen journalism and get to the right outlets so that, people can read? It's not just somewhere in some siloed place. And I don't know if you're going to talk about that. And I'll mute myself here and listen up. Thanks a lot, you guys.
Oh, for sure. Thank you. These are good questions. I think depending on where you are in your own local publication, definitely reaching out and talking to them, seeing if they have any opportunities to look for, citizen journalists or freelancers. But all of this data that we were talking about today is publicly available, and as available to any journalist as it is any other member of the public. So I think approaching these, yeah, public and free, thank goodness, for most states. And so. So there are opportunities there, and I think it is a good idea to look at, especially very local elections, to see what sort of the financial landscape is, see who's connected. Um, yeah, does we've got looks like we're about out of time here, but thank you all very much for coming. This has been recorded, so the recording will be available later on. And if you have any other questions for us, our emails are available on the MuckRock website, I believe.